Okay, so gentlemen, welcome again to the Shir and Avodas HaParsha. I just actually saw somebody published a sefer called Avodas HaParsha. Wasn't me. But anyway, it's fine. The names are general and can do. For tonight's piece, we have to hear a little bit about the author, because really the piece is expressing how he managed through life during the war, during the concentration camps. And it's not just like Libi Omerli, my heart tells me, it's clear to me that this piece, and I'll show from his biography how it's clear also, that this piece was central in his being able to survive the war in the way that he did. So his name was Rav Gad Eisner. He was a Ger Chassid from Lodz. Early on in the war, his wife was killed. He had one child, a daughter, 18 years old, who was like his right hand. And they were very close, and she was also killed at the beginning of the war with a group of girls who were taken by the Nazis. And then he went into the camps, Chensenov to Buchenwald, to others. And again, it's important to remember the Polish Jews who went into the camps, if they survived, which not that many did, they were in longer than anyone else. Like about 4 years of concentration camp. And he was unique in that he kept his spirits, he kept his sense of humor even. That was what was, he kept people alive by doing jokes with them of all different types. He kept coming up with these things, even though he was physically weak already from the beginning of the war. And here he had to do slave labor. In other words, we're learning about the slavery in Mitzrayim. And here he can describe exactly the slave labor he was doing, digging ditches in frozen ground, right? He said when you're just a walking skeleton, and somehow to keep up the spirits and keep up the spirits of others, there's a secret. And this is a sefer he taught when he came out eventually. He was in DP camps, he was in France. Then he came to Eretz Yisrael, he was the mashgiach for the Ger Yeshiva in Tel Aviv. And he gave some famous shiurim in Sfas Emes, which were there. So they brought out this set, right? Happy to do my book club, Moreshet Gad. These are right from his shiurim on Sfas Emes. This is a biography of his that came out that I'll tie in. Mesil's Gad, right? They called him Gudel, right? Gad. It's not the most common of the Shvatim names that we have. Gad, and in the kind of Polish Yiddish pronunciation, they called him Gudel. So this piece is about the fourth of the four Lashonos of Geula. The four languages of Geula that we find in this week's Parsha, right, that Hashem says that we have V'hotzeisi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim. I will take you out from under the suffering, the burdens in Mitzrayim. V'itzalti eschem me'avodosam. I will save you from, right, their slavery. V'ga'alti eschem b'zor natuyav shvatim gedolim. I will redeem you with this outstretched hands and great, punishments to the Mitzrayim. And I will take you to me to be a nation, and I will be to you Elokim. Right? And you will know that I am Hashem, who has taken and even takes you out of this suffering Mitzrayim. So he starts with the following question. The first three Lashonos are all Lashonos of Yitzias Mitzrayim, meaning V'hotzeisi, I'll take you out. V'itzalti, I'll save you from that situation. V'ga'alti, I'll redeem you from that situation. But v'lakachti eschem li la'am is different. That's talking about how you're going to be mine. He says, how does that fit into the set? We call them the Arba Lashonos of Geula. The four Lashonos of Geula, our four cups that the Leila Seder correspond to them. So how is that? So he explains like this. He says that we need to, in order to understand this, we need to understand the definition of Golus a little bit more. Golus isn't just that I'm in another country. Golus isn't just that I'm subjugated under a dictator. He says that the ikar of the Golus is that a person is not able to realize who he's working for. Meaning, he says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, put us into Mitzrayim. As we mentioned last week, that was told to Avram Avinu. Your children are going to be strangers in a strange land. And they're going to cause you to be slaves and suffer. So he says the essence of Golus has to do with the mindset, has to do with the extension of your mind, meaning it says in the Pasuk, Vaya'avidu Mitzrayim es b'nei Yisrael b'parach, that the Mitzrayim enslaved Am Yisrael with this work that could break them. He says the reason this work was so torturous was because it was Mitzrayim doing it. Meaning, in the mind of the Jew, I am now in the control of the Mitzrayim. The Mitzrayim are making me do this work. When I do this work, I'm doing it for the Mitzrayim. So the Sfasem is said like this, Ikar Golus Mitzrayim, the main part of the Golus of Mitzrayim, She'ein Asecha v'Hadash shel Odom Mispashit Koroi B'chol Ma'asav, the things that you know in your mind cannot make the connection and extend into what you're doing, right? You're doing actions, but things that you know in your mind, which are very important to get into that action, are not able to get in there. Meaning, I'm jumping a little bit to the chase, if Hashem said that you are going to be going into Mitzrayim, v'avodim v'inu osam, and Hashem told Yaakov Avinu, Anochi eredim b'cha Mitzrayim, I'm going down with you to Mitzrayim. So therefore, if they hadn't been in Golus, they would know that while they were working there making bricks, they're working for Hashem, not for the Mitzrayim. Hashem wants them to do this. And that would change the experience entirely. The Golus is you can't connect to that. It can't, all you can focus on is there's a Mitzri standing over me with a whip, and I gotta make bricks or he's gonna hit me, and Hashem's out of the picture there. He said that's the Golus, and even if it's something intellectually perhaps you know in your mind, it can't extend into that world of your work. It can't extend into what you're doing. One example, I guess, of someone who could do it, the Talmud Rebbe asked, when it talks about Yosef HaTzadik in the prison in Mitzrayim, it says, Kol asher oseh Hashem matzliach biyado. Everything he did, it helped him be very successful. Right? What kind of success is that in Egyptian prison? Whatever it is. You imagine, some lady telling her, my son makes the best license plates in the penitentiary of everybody else. It's like, it's nice, but what is it doing? Plus, especially, he quoted a medrash that said, what was the work they had to do in Mitzri prisons? It was there to break your mind and spirit. They would have a big barrel of water. They would give you a cup, and there would be an empty barrel. They say, take the cup, take water, put it in the empty barrel. Empty this one, fill that one. Then reverse. Empty that one, fill this one. Back and forth, purposeless work, right? Which is that which can destroy a person. How can a person be matzliach in such a thing? Because Yosef felt, Hashem's in charge here. He put me in this prison where the only thing you do is schlep water. So for whatever reason, I certainly cannot understand, Hashem wants me to take water from here and put it in there. And therefore, you're able to do that with a sense of hatzlacha. Okay, that is someone who wasn't meshubad in this. But here, he says, this is the idea that the maisim, these actions that you're doing, cannot connect to the thought, to what's happening there. Now, we know that thought definitely affects the quality of what we're doing. He quotes Chazal, who say in Masechtas Nazir, Yesharim darchei Hashem tzadikim yelchu bam poshim yikoshlu bam. The ways of Hashem are straight. Tzadikim walk in those right paths. Poshim, right, sinners, end up stumbling on the same thing. They give a mashal. Two people made their Korban Pesach. One did it having in mind to fulfill the mitzvah of eating Korban Pesach. The other one did it for achila gasa. He wanted to stuff himself with lamb. He says the one who did it for the mitzvah, that's tzadikim yelchubam. The one who did it just for achila gasa, so that is the sinner stumbles in it. So he says the physical act can be the same, but the content of the mind and the heart and the soul definitely makes a difference. Now it's clear, Chazal tell us in Pirkei Avos, lo medrash ikar ela ha'maisa, that you can't sit and meditate on matzah and be yodzei matzah. You have to eat the matzah, right? That's the clear aspect of our mitzvah, is what you're doing. But the qualitative sense of that action you're doing is different depending on what you have in your head. Now, at least with a mitzvah, it's easier because you can have that basic idea that the reason I'm doing this is because Hashem commanded me. But here, when it comes to something, it's not a mitzvah. It comes to making bricks for the Egyptians, right? For a person to actually feel that this is what Hashem wants me to do, and I'm free of them because I'm doing it for Hashem, that's a very difficult thing. He says, what would be demanded from Bnei Yisrael and Mitzrayim is Lizkor et HaMashalech. Remember the one who sent you there. Hashem Yisbarach Asher Yorad Mi'imam Mitzrayim. Hashem who went down with them to Mitzrayim, and, right, who will go up with them. So this is something that in certain ways could have freed them. Instead of being avodim to avodim, then they would have been avodim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is the task. He says, you face a problem though, and this is where it gets difficult. If you were going to say, the mitzvah is almost like an illusion. He wouldn't be forcing me to make bricks if Hashem didn't allow him to do so. Hashem, if he would take away the life from that Egyptian, he would disappear in a second. But then you're left with the fact that Hashem has brought you into the slavery. And that's difficult. Okay, now again, we're speaking about a person who went through the greatest horrors in the war. He says, but here as well, he says, a child, right, is supposed to understand that he can't always understand what his father does, but he knows that the kavanah of what his father does is for good and is with love and that there's a purpose to it. So he says, therefore, even if the child can't understand it, right, meaning if I take that Egyptian out of the equation, so to speak, again, he certainly gets his punishment for doing something terrible. But that wouldn't be happening if Hashem didn't take us and put in this Mitzrayim and want us to be doing this. He says, nonetheless, if I am there, he says it must be for the good. Okay? He says that somehow must be the good. I couldn't say such a thing. Only he could say it, like I say, because he has gone through it. He says, Am Yisrael no longer felt a sense of shlichus, a sense of purpose in Mitzrayim. And right, they felt that they cried out to Hashem in Mitzrayim. So the crying out to Hashem was coming because of Moshe Rabbeinu telling them, "V'lakachti eschem la'am." Let me try to explain. The idea of "V'lakachti eschem li la'am" means that you will now always be able to remember that you work for me, so to speak, that you are mine. That's the promise. And that's something that they didn't have then. They couldn't connect to it. But the very image of it was so beautiful that this is what brought about their preparation for the Gula. The Sfas Emes says, Hashem Yisbarach tziva lahagid ze livnei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell Am Yisrael Mitzrayim ki yotzaki me'avoda kosher b'fal. They were crying out because it was miserable and it was hard. V'achar kach sheshamu mimoshe Rabbeinu, when they heard from Moshe Rabbeinu, ki achar ha'geula yochol aleim shem shamayim, after the geula, the name of Hashem would, so to speak, be part of them. V'lakachti eschem li la'am, v'yisi lachem le'elokim. So then they realized that it's possible to reach a state of closeness that even if we were in such a situation, we would still remain close to Hashem and would be able to remember, and that would actually make things easier as opposed to harder. And that was something they yearned for, and that brought about the Geula. So this is part of what we received from Mitzrayim. From Yetzias Mitzrayim, we received this idea that no matter what is done to a Jew, he's still able to access that. Rav Gudel himself, right, that is what he did. And when he taught this piece from the Sfas Emes, he would say, many times he said, right, he says, what does it mean, right? He says that Hashem's light can reach the lowest of lowest places. He says that means more hiddenness, the place where it's harder to have emunah. He says you can't compare it to the Hester, let's say if a person's learning the Beis Medrash and the lights go out. He wants to learn and he can't. That's a certain hester, a certain hiding. He says, but he can learn Baal Peh, or he can light another candle. But sometimes there's hiddenness upon hiddenness upon hiddenness, hester upon hester upon hester, darker and darker. And nonetheless, you have to be able to realize that Hashem's light reaches there. He said that's stronger. He says, Yesh, he says, Yudim achazu atzmam be'esterim gedolim ad ma'od. He said there were Jews who managed to maintain this in the darkest of times. He says, Kvar siparti lechem. He said, I told you. Kasher beghetto. In the ghetto, he says, the German would beat a Jew mercilessly, and after he fainted from the beating, he would pour cold water on him to wake him up and then beat him again. And as he's beating him, he's like speaking against Hashem and telling him, where's your God? Why doesn't he do anything? He says, that's Hester. He says, and yet, he says, and you know that Hashem could make that Russia disappear in a second. But yet, if you can say, if this is what he wants, this world is a world of hiddenness. And he said, all these hidden things are eventually going to be revealed. And Yetzias Mitzrayim somehow gave us the ability to do that. Now, it's there in all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be such horrible things. But again, when a person is working in a job that he doesn't love or that's particularly difficult, if he can put it together, HaKadosh Baruch Hu put me in a situation, I'm supposed to earn a living, right? I have certain talents. I went into a thing. I got into this job. Doesn't mean you're forced to remain there and can't look for another job. But don't think, that boss is making me do X, Y, and Z. That you work for Hashem. I'll tell you a story. I believe it connects to it. I thought it was an amazing story. Rav Meir Chodesh was the mashgiach in the Chevron Yeshiva. Again, he came from the Slobodka to Chevron, the city of Chevron, with the yeshiva. He survived the massacre, and he went on to become the mashgiach. So he said when he came to Slobodka, he came as a very young boy, even before Bar Mitzvah. And then World War I hit while he was learning there. And he said when he was 18 years old, Jews were running from place to place during World War I because borders kept changing, the armies kept coming in. So he said he was learning in a certain town, and then suddenly word came out the German army is coming. And people started rushing out of town. So he went to the town square with a friend of his who he had encountered in that town, and everyone was trying to get on wagons or carriages to get out of town. And people were jumping on, and his friend said, I left my papers and my money and my tefillin in the place where I'm staying. Okay, can you wait for me? He says, okay, go get it. And the friend was taking a long time, and he's watching wagon after wagon go out, and it's getting quieter in town. And you have the sense that the German army is coming. He has no idea what happened to him. So I said, how long am I supposed to wait? It's like it's dangerous, and with all due respect. But he remembered, the Chazal talk about how careful you have to be with sticking to your B'nai Lavoya, those people who are traveling with you. This is your friend, he's going with you, you're on the journey together, and he stuck it out. It's like almost empty. His friend comes running up, and suddenly a wagon drives by. The guy yells out, I got one space. And his friend jumps on the wagon and goes tearing off. And he said, at that moment, he said, he was, number one, just so crushed. He was so angry. He heard himself saying in his mind, I'm never, ever going to wait for anybody else again in my life. Right? I come first. I said, then he got himself in hand. He said, wait a second. Did I wait for him because it's like something I'm paying him and it's a quid pro quo? I do for him, he does for me. I waited for him because I'm a Jew. I'm a Ben Torah. That's what Hashem wants me to do. That's the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do, no matter what the result was. It brought good into the world instead of evil. It made me who I was supposed to be as opposed to who I wasn't supposed to be. And he said that was a transformative event for his life. So I think that's part of what it says here.
Who was it?
Rav Meir Chodesh, his name was. So he actually made almost a pun on his name. He said, at that point I became a Meir Chodesh. I became a new mayor. So he says, this can be in every situation. For a person to remember, right, that Hashem is behind this situation. And it's true, that puts me into the point of having to say, I can't understand why you're doing this. You could make this situation different. But realizing that that is our life here in this hidden world, but realizing this is what Hashem wants me to be doing now. He says that is the gift of coming out of Mitzrayim. Meaning, you always work for me. You're a consultant every place you're placed, right? I don't care if you work for IBM or if you work for the grocery store, you work for anything. You work for me. I place you in these different locations, but never forget that you work for me. And that's the das, that understanding that can extend into your daily deeds, into everything you do, and that's the true coming out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is that which separates those things and limits it, and doesn't let that become part of the day that you feel and that you understand. So again, he was a living example of how he was able to do that in the most difficult situations. Alvai, nobody should ever have to face such a thing, but in our situations, each of us, it's hard enough, and to be able to remember, remember who you work for, right? Let your mind extend. And he says, therefore, for the geula that we're asking for and looking for, don't just look that the physical problems should stop and all these things. He says, right, look, I'll read his final words in this. We shouldn't just hope for the, so to speak, the relief that we'll have in the days of Mashiach. We shouldn't just look forward to the tranquility and the physical happiness that we'll have. This is what we should hope for. That the light of Hashem should shine on us and in us. And that we'll always be able to understand in all situations that He's the King of all these things. That's the world of Golus and Gula. I think we can all feel the times that we're in that Golus. And if at least we can feel it and yearn for something different, that's already coming out of Mitzrayim.